As you know, I like to cover the topic of censorship, digital media censorship on the podcast. And I have a terrific guest, Kris Ruby, who's going to help us dive deeper into the actual mechanics, the mechanisms that drive this kind of censorship. Kris Ruby is the CEO of Ruby Media Group. She's an expert on artificial intelligence, so-called machine learning, as well as social media. And you can follow her on Twitter. This is kind of funny, at sparklingruby. Her website is just Kris Ruby, Kris Ruby, RUBY.com. Kris, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you. I think I came across this fascinating thread that kind of got me onto the work you were doing. It was initially merely a conversation that you were having, a back and forth with a whistleblower at Twitter. Talk a little bit about how you found the whistleblower and also what was the upshot of that conversation.
Sure. So thanks so much for having me on the show. You're correct in that it did start out with just a conversation about some things that were going on at Twitter. And I really wanted to understand what guano meant in Bari Weiss's reporting when I saw that on the back end in that screenshot. And from there, I had 1,000 other questions once I understood that had to do with machine learning. So really that screenshot, I had more questions than we were really given answers. And that's what started my research and reporting here. And from there, I discovered and received many files pertaining to how Twitter used artificial intelligence and natural language processing and machine learning to essentially moderate content deemed to be political misinformation.
All right, so let's talk about that because in the Twitter files, most of it has focused on the kind of internal communications at Twitter. Yoel Roth says this to another guy. And so these are human communications that have been extensively documented by a series of journalists, obviously at the behest of Elon Musk. You could almost call it the Ruby files, in which you're talking about the fact that these social media companies, they don't just operate by human beings looking at something and go, oh, wow, that's misinformation. They use algorithms. They use machine learning. So let's understand some of these terms. What is an algorithm?
Well, so what's interesting here is it's not so much the algorithms that I have as much as the list of n-grams. So n-grams are used, I would say, in an algorithm as a series of keywords. One of the n-grams that I noticed was something called 2,000 mules, which of course, which is how we got to where we are right now. That's a perfect example of political algorithmic bias, where Twitter deemed 2,000 mules to be associated with political misinformation. That was what I was told. And therefore, if you were tweeting, if you were using the phrase political misinformation and election fraud and voter fraud and Dropbox, all of those terms together in context, that would be flagged. And it would be flagged by either a human for review or an algorithm. But I think you really hit it right on the mark, which is that the majority of this content moderation is not being done by humans. No one is belaboring over what you're saying, right? If you're not you, or if you're not Charlie Kirk, or if you're not, someone at a very high level, no one really cares. And that's just the truth. The machine learning will take you out. That's the big smoking gun story here that I really think people don't get. And that I think, unfortunately, the Twitter files somewhat misleads people to think that Yoel Roth is sitting there talking about their account, where it's just not happening. All of this is on autopilot in the background. And when people really understand that and they see that story, they're going to be very, very angry, because the truth is in the data. The data doesn't lie, as you know as well from the work that you've done. That's what I'm fighting for here. I'm fighting for truth and transparency in those machine learning documents. I have the data of what was deemed political misinformation with the n-gram list. But that data has a connected underlying vocabulary to it. By that, I mean, when you say 2,000 mules, this is what it means. And this is why you mark it. Those content moderators work off of those documents. We need those documents released to the public so that the public can understand how the data I have connects to those training manuals that they have at Twitter.
Now, you've had an interesting exchange with Elon Musk in which you talked about this, and he responded and I think said something to the effect of, this is interesting. And you even asked him, hey, is it okay if I release the data that I have? And I think that he said, yeah, if you camouflage some identities, you can do that. Are you saying that you think that these machine learning algorithms are still operating at Twitter despite the release of the Twitter files?
Yes, I am. I have no evidence that they're not, because people are still getting suspended and removed from the platform for using the very same words. But I think there's evidence of something else here. I think when someone really understands how machine learning or natural language processing works, and also what it means to be in compliant with current laws around speech, there's no way you can truly have free speech on any social media platform with the state of AI being used in content moderation. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm not saying that someone's misleading, but I do think that we need a greater level of transparency and trust. For ML to work, something has to be positive and something has to be negative. What is Elon Musk choosing to be positive or to be negative? We know that with machine learning or things like ChatGPT, it works with reinforcement learning. What behavior is being reinforced? We don't have answers for any of that when it comes to the future of machine learning at Twitter. That's very important information for anyone to know or to even question when we're talking about these terms. And I will say this. I think that really where we're headed is very scary with a lot of these quote unquote responsible AI programs at some of the top tech companies in the world. In my opinion, they are extremely irresponsible. They are often staffed or they work directly with academic researchers who are funded essentially by the government. And when I asked who created these word lists, where did the word list come from? They said, well, we work directly with the CDC and the government and third-party agencies who told us what word list to monitor because they're the experts. So here we have a situation where data scientists are really actually doing what they're told to do. They're not necessarily speaking out because they're doing their job. They can't not do what they're told to do without risk of getting fired. So I'm not even sure it's their fault. This is so deep of how this is going on, and no one's really questioning what machine learning fairness even means or what responsible AI means, because we have a bunch of irresponsible people running it.
Let's take a pause. When we come back, Kris, let's dive a little bit more into the significance of this and what conservatives can do to fight back against it. I'm back with Kris Ruby, the CEO of Ruby Media Group, and we're talking about digital censorship and how it's driven by these things called, algorithms, but also machine learning, natural language processing, so-called NLP. Kris, let me summarize what I think you're saying, and that is that the content of what people see on these social media platforms is being manipulated. I guess it's somewhat similar to saying that, when you go to the grocery store, there are certain things that are put at eye level and you can easily see those. And there are other things that are sort of tucked away and you can go looking for them. And there might be a way to find them, but they're being suppressed. They're not being encouraged. Let's put it that way. And you're saying that in the grocery store, you know why they do that. They're trying to sell certain things. Maybe they think there's a bigger market, for this or for that. But here, it's driven not only governmentally, but I think you're also saying ideologically. It works in a manner that discriminates against conservatives. Is that a correct summary of what's going on? And if so, is exposure of this enough, or are there some steps that need to be taken? Can the House GOP do something? In other words, how do we stop this?
Yes, I would say that what you said is accurate. I would also say that 99% of takedowns on social media platforms are really starting with machine learning. That's what was so concerning here. If we look at the data that I shared, that data, by the way, is not data that anyone reported. Okay, so when we were 2,000 mules over and over again, no one is reporting a tweet that says 2,000 mules. This is an algorithm through natural language processing in the background. If you use a series of words, including 2,000 mules, it's automatically being flagged. And that's the scariest part of this, because I think people are looking at the wrong thing. They're looking at, someone reported this and now a human's going to look at it. No, Like, we're not talking about that. We're talking about a system that operates all the time, that is always running. And if you're not programming that language, and if you don't know how to speak that language or understand that language, then you can't even ask the right questions. That's what's happening at a congressional level right now. So anytime these people are put on the stand, they don't have the technical expertise to really question what's happening. We saw that with Jack as well. Did Jack lie or did he not lie? Because he talked about using labels, but he talked about, to your point, the labels on the front end. He's not mentioning the data labels on the back end. He's not mentioning that 2,000 mules is an NLP term. He's not mentioning that voter fraud is also an engram. And so there's this, to answer your question, what can be done? The discrepancy is getting larger and larger of this knowledge gap. And when I asked how many conservatives were on that team and data science making these decisions, and the answer was like 0. So you need more people that are like, wait a second, I don't think 2,000 mules should really be an engram. But if you have no one, like, for all of this talk of diversity and inclusion, where is the political diversity and inclusion when it comes to algorithmic political bias? My opinion, it's just not there.
So you seem to be saying not merely that the social media platforms aren't accommodating political diversity, but that a lot of conservatives, including a lot of congressmen and their staffs, don't have the background knowledge to be able to put these guys. I mean, they're lawyers, and so they're good at what they do. But if you don't have the technical knowledge, I guess it's sort of like trying to examine a ballistics expert, and you don't know anything about ballistics. So as a result, you ask really dumb questions, and the ballistics guy talks circles around you because he knows what's going on and you don't. So what you're saying is the conservatives need to hit the books a little bit and master this, at least at a layman's level, so you can bring these guys in front of committees, ask them the right kinds of questions, because they're acting like the very mention of voter fraud is itself something that deserves to be A, flagged, and B, potentially suppressed.
Correct. And they also have these, and the way they get away with it is because they add it to their terms of service, and they under the header of civic and integrity, right? They add it and say, but they're only showing you what's on the front end. The key is what is in data science on the back end. And I feel like a lot of the reporting on this, the stories missed. They're looking at engineering. They're talking about quote unquote algorithms. They're not really talking about data science at all. That's where all of this is, right? Are we really fighting? I don't know what the purpose of the Twitter files is, but if the purpose was actually about truth, then this is where they'd be looking. That's what's frustrating. The truth is in the data. The truth would be in those machine learning documents that were used for content moderation. Google, many years ago, they have something called the Quality Rater Guidelines. Those that were leaked, and ever since they have to make them public. If Elon Musk is a man of his word, I don't understand why he won't do the same thing. There's a difference between quote unquote releasing an algorithm, which is something else, versus releasing the list of terms that are being used in natural language processing. For example, do you think that you have a right to know that 2,000 mules was used as an engram by Twitter as political misinformation? Should you have known that?
Absolutely. And by an engram, I take it that what you mean is it's a trigger word, right? In other words, it's programmed in so that when people, even some guy with 10 followers, if he hashtags 2,000 mules or mentions it, he sets off the trigger, and therefore he becomes a target for suppression or banning. I mean, this is really scary stuff, Ruby. And I think you're right that this, at the very least, it complements the human dimension, but in scale, it seems to be even more important than the human dimension by a huge factor. So you've done really great work in exposing this, and please keep this work up. And would love to have you back to talk further as you make, as you surely will, more discoveries in this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Despite the U.S. blowing through the $31.4 trillion debt ceiling in January, the White House still refuses to reduce spending, while our national leadership has buried their heads in the sand when it comes to fiscal responsibility. Hey, it's time to pull yours out. Now would be a great time to diversify into gold with Birch Gold. That's why I buy gold in times of high uncertainty and instability. I want something